Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And we want to welcome back for the sixth time Mark D. White. He's a professor of philosophy at the College of Staten Island, was written widely on superheroes and philosophy, including the books Batman and Ethics and A Philosopher Reads volumes on Daredevil, Thor, and Civil War, as well as contributions to many volumes in the Blackwell philosophy and the pop culture series. And his new book, available now, is called Ethics of the Fantastic Four. And Mark, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on. And thank you
Well,
for
it's
being
always
here.
great to be here, guys. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. And so before I even begin with the passage, I do have to say this as a shout out to you, man. So like in terms of just and you, I mean, you already know this from our personal relationship, but I really want our audience to get this. Like Mark is actually legitimately one of my favorite, absolute favorite intellectuals. So my work has been significantly influenced by him. Like if you read my stuff on Psychology Today, a lot of the
Oh,
stuff we've
wow.
taught, yeah, a lot of the stuff we've talked about on podcasts. And what to me is like, and I'm sure, in some ways, maybe you feel this too about other people, because you're probably too modest to think this about yourself. But it's so fucking weird, man, that we live in a society where somebody like kind of Jordan Peterson, right, has like millions upon millions of views and viewers and whatever, right? And then like work that's such quality, and for our audience, they're gonna see why today. Like work that's such quality and so has such thoughtfulness to it, man. Just for whatever reason, man, just the nuance gets lost, and people want black and white stances, and it's so amazing to me, man, that a lot of this stuff a lot of times gets overlooked. And so what I like about this so much, as again, as I was going through the prep work for this episode, is that like you take seriously so many different competing views of morality, and it makes it so rich and so challenging and so interesting. And I'm like, my God, as I'm going through this, I'm like, who's right? How do we figure this out?
Yeah.
How did they figure this out? How are they still the Fantastic Four? So I just, before reading the passage, I just really wanted to get that out there. So if there's any particular intellectual you guys look into, please go follow Mark White, man.
Thank you. Thank you, Leon.
Absolutely,
Do,
man. Okay.
do you have anything to add, Alan?
No,
You're
I
awfully quiet.
wholeheartedly agree with him. I wholeheartedly no, because honestly, combining, no, no, they could get into it for sure.
Yeah. Oh my God.
No,
That's probably one of the best things ever said on the podcast. Oh my God.
no, but my actual take on it is combining philosophy and then also pop culture, I think is completely genius. Anyway,
Well, that,
our
that was William Irwin, and you guys know
Yeah.
Bill very well, obviously. So I mean, that was his idea, and I every time I do this, I credit him for starting this genre and letting me participate in it and getting me started. Without Bill, I wouldn't be doing this. So I have to thank him every chance I get.
100%. And also just to add on to that, doing that with, let's say, Daredevil, Thor, let's say also with Batman, and actually doing an in-depth, you look at the story and then you actually see like how it ties to philosophy. For example, like even our best films, or even animated films, like sometimes they explore those topics and
Mhm.
introduce it to a wide audience. But when you actually break it down in a book as well and tie it to those, pop culture films, shows, comics, and it makes it way easier for a mass audience to kind of also see like what are these things they're talking about in the
Mhm.
book, what are these themes, and yeah, but you could go ahead.
Okay, I'm just gonna try to collect myself. Okay, so in his book wrote, Mark wrote, at the end of their origin in the very first issue, the Fantastic Four establishes its purpose going forward. After each member experiences their new abilities, even if not the full extent of them, especially in Sue's case, Reed proclaims that together we have more power than any humans have ever possessed, quote unquote. Ben interrupts, saying, quote unquote, you don't have to make a speech, big shot. We understand. We've got to use that power to help mankind, right? Reed agrees. And the team mission is set, if still vague, to use their power in the service of others. This basic purpose is reiterated many times over the years, sometimes with additions noting the nature of the team. One time, after they defeat Doctor Doom, Reed apparently forgets their original mission statement and wonders if, with their main adversary gone, the team might be dissolved. After calling him, quote unquote, the most stubborn jackass I've ever known, Sue reminds him that we, quote unquote, we're not merely a team, we're a family, and families stay together through thick and thin. Later, Reed remembers what he said after their fateful accident and reiterates our reason for existence, quote unquote. We've been given extraordinary abilities, and not to use them to benefit to mankind would be a waste. It would be to waste what we have in the most foolish manner imaginable.
Hmm.
As we would expect to adds, as I've been saying, quote unquote, we're a family and we work together, we stay together the way a family is meant to be. So let's get into the actual characters. And so just, to get a kind of basic understanding of all of this. So what I love is how you divide up the characters with the different schools of morality, philosophy, etc. And so let's actually get into the specific characters and what, let's say maybe not subscribe to, but what sort of moral school of thought they most resemble.
Okay. Well, we'll start with Reed. I might as well do it in the order I did it in the book, which
Hmm.
is, I started with Reed Richards, the Mr. Fantastic, whose most obvious superpower is stretching, but whose real contribution to the group and to the world, as most people acknowledge in the comics, is genius,
Hmm.
which is just simply enabled all the more by their fantastic abilities. They can go exploring in outer space and alternate dimensions with more ease, given that they have their various powers and abilities. Um, Reed is very again, I'm very wary, I think, just being a philosopher of oversimplifying, like Leon just said in his fantastic statement that it's not black and white, and I can't even take these characters. It was easier when I wrote the Civil War book and I could cast Captain America and Iron Man against each other. Basically, Captain America, in that case, being a deontologist, working for right and justice, and Iron Man working for utilitarian ends, trying to do what's best for the greatest number of people.
Hmm.
And even though, I mean, that's still oversimplifying a little bit, that's pretty good description of those two, at least in that situation, that particular storyline. With these Fantastic Four, it was, and this was the problem I had coming up with the structure of the book, because they these four characters aren't as intrinsically rooted in their ethical approaches as, say, Captain America is. Captain America
Mm,
is someone who I've argued since I started writing about him is a character, perhaps one of the few superheroes defined by his ethics,
mm,
not by his powers, not by his costume, not by his origin, actually by his moral behavior, which is why in my blog I go through each and every appearance he makes in the comic books and I say how each one references his ethics,
Hmm.
which I think supports the case that that is his defining feature.
mm,
That's not true of many other superheroes. Even, Iron Man has a very strong utilitarian orientation, and you can find that in the Fantastic Four, but the Fantastic Four is a much more fantasy and science fiction based concept.
Hmm.
And it's not, as many of the DC heroes at the time, the DC heroes from the Golden Age were revamped in the late 50s. And, the Flash and Hawkman and the Atom were all, reinvented to be science based instead of magic based.
mm,
It was, the 50s, the atomic age, space travel was developing and everything. And,
Hmm.
everyone wanted science fiction.
mm,
So, the Fantastic Four are very much science fiction based characters. And they're all, I try to make this point in the book, they're all generally moral, they're all generally heroic. And it's harder in their case to really spell out the differences in their philosophical approach, especially compared to someone like, Captain America and Iron Man that obviously have civil wars every year. So I say that all to just preface this, that when I say that Reed Richards is generally a utilitarian, I don't mean to make him out as strongly in that camp as Iron Man is.
mm,
Sure.
mm,
Yeah.
But he is very much, this is the foremost thing on his mind, is how can we use, like in the quote Leon read, how can we use our powers to help mankind? How can I use my intellect to help mankind? How can we use this opportunity that fate gave us to help mankind? And the thought is always on how to improve human well-being, and that essentially is the goal of utilitarianism. Now, the drawback of that of course Iron Man is also very guilty of, is sometimes ignoring the moral guardrails that a utilitarian needs to observe in order to make sure they pursue their goal of maximizing human well-being without actually violating any moral wrongs,
Mm,
anything that a deontologist would say, okay, this is great, but you can't do this. Okay, you can't just, kill 1% of the population to save everyone else.
mm,
Okay, not that that isn't necessarily perhaps the correct option, but I mean, that obviously needs a lot of discussion and a lot of justification. Okay, and that's Reed and Sue kind of play the same role that Iron Man and Captain America play,
mm,
in
Mm.
that Sue often acts as that guardrail for Reed. When Reed goes a little too far in his elaborate scientific plans to save the world, Sue will bring him back from the edge and say, okay, but you can't just take over people's minds, even though it would make them better off in the long run.
mm,
That's not okay.
Right.
Or, you're endangering too many people to do this. Or, I, again, like the Civil War, that in chapter 6, I think, in the book, I talk about the Fantastic Four during Civil War. They weren't the main players. They a little bit in the main book, they weren't as important to the story as Captain America and Iron Man were, but kind of in their own little pocket of the Marvel universe, they were going through the same battle that Captain America and Iron Man were.
Mm.
mm,
With Reed being on Iron Man's side, wanting to implement all these solutions and all these plans to implement registration, which violated the liberty and autonomy of the superheroes that didn't agree with it.
mm,
And Sue kept saying, listen, we're throwing our friends in jail. Do you really think this is the right thing to do? You just built a clone of Thor that killed one of our friends. Is it worth it? And kept pointing out all these things he was doing and saying, I know your intentions are good, but you have to realize that some things, even done for the sake of the good, are not right.
mm,
So, though I wouldn't call Sue a diehard Kantian, she does bring that element of deontology and restraint and common sense morality into play with Reed's very ambitious, often overexcited
mm,
goal of using his intellect to benefit mankind.
mm.
So, I mean, generally, I'd say, Reed is the utilitarian and Sue is the deontologist in the story.
Yep.
Um, I'll turn to Ben next because Ben is just your basic good guy,
Mm,
and kind of like Thor was when I wrote the Thor book. And when you have someone that's just generally good, doesn't necessarily follow any particular method of ethical thinking, weighing out the positives and negatives or judging things according to the categorical imperative, like Kant would say. I generally just represent those people as according to virtue ethics. They're
mm,
trying to be good.
Mm.
And they're trying to be brave, they're trying to be heroic, they're sacrificing themselves when they see someone needs it. So those kind of characters, which I think most superheroes are, especially if they're not very clearly defined in terms of their ethics, most superheroes are generally, you know, virtuous characters.
mm.
So I would say that's what Ben is, especially when he kind of steps back from all of Reed's planning and Sue's arguments with him, and Ben says, "Let's just go save people."
Hmm.
Even though saving people is generally utilitarian, he's not necessarily doing it with a mind towards maximizing total utility. He's doing it saying, "We're heroes. Heroes save people. Let's save people."
Wow.
Yeah, in regards to Ben Grimm, yeah, there were even times he's been offered, to look normal again, but he'd lose his powers, but then he can't save people,
Right.
anymore. Or maybe somebody nefarious like Doctor Doom, who's maybe offering that for maybe some sort of, for him to maybe do something for him that
Mm,
might
Right.
betray the Fantastic Four. And yeah, he's definitely an exemplar of just being a really good person as far as that goes. You could almost misconstrue it as like from a certain angle, it almost looks utilitarian. Like no, I mean, if I lose my powers, I won't be able to then save people. But it's not really about that for him.
or even one could say like,
Right.
oh, but then in the future I might hate myself, so yada yada. Like, why would I want to do that? Like, I'd rather just take this over that. But yeah, it's interesting that he doesn't even do that. It's not even that thought out. He's just like, this is the right thing.
Right. Right. And that's just because, the virtue ethicist would say he's falling back on his innate character traits, which are to be the good guy, to do the right thing, which, like I said, you can always put in terms of utilitarian calculation or deontological judgment, but he doesn't do that. He just has a sound, innate sense of right and wrong or good or bad, and he just does it as a matter of his moral character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Johnny,
Yeah.
the Human Torch, is I think the most difficult one to pin down
Mm,
as far as all these things go, because for the most part, I think he just goes with the group.
mm-hmm.
He's the one that enjoys being a superhero the most. He's the one that feels blessed by this accident, made
Mm-hmm.
him into a celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he is more likely to go along with whatever the group wants to do. But he always goes along with it wholeheartedly. And in the book, I try in his chapter, I focus on the inherent danger that his powers pose for people, whether it's his friends, family, girlfriends, admirers. He has several fans through the history of the comics that light themselves on fire and die because they want to be like him,
Yeah.
Wow.
and which tortures him. And of course, every time he says, "I can't be the Human Torch anymore," people are going to do this,
Mm,
and eventually he has to be convinced that the good he does far outweighs the occasional person that takes his example the wrong way.
mm,
But I think the most interesting thing about Johnny that came out to me as I was researching and writing the book was that he almost seems to be the most eager of the four to rush into danger,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily because he's impetuous, and he is. That's one of his key character traits. He's youthful and impetuous and hot-headed and ill-tempered. But just the fact that he deep down he sees himself as expendable. He sees himself as the least worthy one of the group.
mm,
Reads the genius, sues the mother of the group,
mm,
essentially. Ben's the tragic figure who should suffer least, who suffers already, so he should suffer least in the future. Johnny's the one that's gotten a kick out of the whole thing, so he feels that he should actually sacrifice himself for the others if he has a chance.
mm,
And I think once this started to come out in the comics, it really highlights a lot of his past behavior when he was just shown to be hot tempered and impetuous, just rushing into danger without thinking about it. And everyone said, "Oh, Johnny, you have to think before you act."
mm,
And what this later behavior indicates is maybe he did. Maybe it was very rational. He did think it out.
Mm-hmm.
And he decided this is, this is what heroes do. We not only save people, but we risk our own lives to do so. And given that he feels his life is less worthy than the others, he's just naturally the person to do that.
right. And can you also get into his moral growth too? Because that seemed to have been pretty important. Where so you've already mentioned that it's kind of hard to pin down, for the most part, the four of them fully in terms of ascribing or, kind of attributing an ethical system to them. But Johnny specifically, how come?
Well, this gets a little more meta than like to do in the comics. When I write about these
Mm,
characters, I kind of write about them as if they were real people.
mm,
That biographers just
mhm,
chronicled their lives. Good thing you edit this.
mhm.
Uh,
Oh, we're gonna keep that in.
I know. But occasionally writers will reverse changes or revamp things or change direction in a way that you can't really explain within the story.
Mm,
It's kind of like when I talk about why doesn't Batman kill the Joker, and I
Mm-hmm.
talk about all the moral considerations, and then someone in the audience will say, "Well, he doesn't kill the Joker because the Joker's too financially viable to Warner Brothers." And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, but what's the fun of saying that? The
right.
fun is finding an explanation in story to rationalize it in terms of Batman's decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring this up because the problem with Johnny is that writers and editors and artists can't really commit to having a steady stream of maturation of moral development for him, because eventually someone's going to want to bring him back to being an early 20s impetuous hot-headed kid.
Mm,
So you'll have growth for a while, especially if one writer writes them for many years.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have growth and you'll have development, but then when another writer takes them over, they'll often take him back to being a young jerk.
wow.
So during Jonathan Hickman's run, which led up to the first time he died, which he died protecting the world from the dangers of the negative zone,
Mm.
Hmm.
where Ben wants to do it, but he actually tricks Ben into going back in the Baxter building, and Johnny stays outside and says, "I've got this." And again, that shows, he's basically saying, I'm going to take the hit this time.
Mm.
And eventually he comes back, but they all think he's dead for a long time and they all mourn him. And then he comes back, and I think the explanation when he came back was, even though he was only gone for a few months in the regular universe, he was there for like 10 years or something.
Mm.
Wow.
And he kept on being killed and revived and killed and revived and killed and revived. So he comes back after this experience. He should be a grizzled old man. He should be more similar to Captain America
Mm.
than the old Johnny Storm. And this lasted for a while, but then another writer took over and wanted to write the Johnny that they grew up seeing.
Mm.
And that maybe that fans expected. Maybe the fans, I don't know what most fans think, but maybe most fans didn't want the mature adult Johnny. Maybe they missed the puckish, young cocky jerk.
Mm. What would you
That's
be
the same
okay?
thing with Spider-Man. They go back and forth between how old Spider-Man is going to be. Is he married? Is he not? Does he have a girlfriend? Is he not? Is he
Mm.
living with Aunt May? Is he not?
Yeah.
And people that grew up with the teenage or the college age Spider-Man want that. So when a writer that grew up with that Spider-Man starts writing Spider-Man, they're going to try to emulate as much of that time period as they can.
Yeah. Well, so, but Mark, can you try? I mean, your best, obviously. Can you try to sort of get into what ethical system sort of seemed most sort of consistent with his line of thought as he developed, if there were any, or was it kind of like a hodgepodge between the writers?
Yeah, I had a very hard time nailing down any one specific ethical
Mm.
viewpoint for Johnny.
Gotcha.
And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, I think that's the case for most superheroes, with the exception of people like Captain America and Iron Man, where their specific ethics is a really part of the definition of the character.
Mm.
Johnny, like most superheroes, is just a good guy, tries to do the right thing, save people, sacrifice himself when he thinks he should. But it would be very hard for me to ascribe one system or another to him, or even a combination of them.
Gotcha.
He's most assuredly, if we had to at least say what he is the least out of the three, out of
Mhm. We'll
utilitarianism,
edit that out.
deontology,
No, we
and
won't.
virtue ethics. Definitely he's the least utilitarian. I would say, at least if, I mean, yes, in a way, when he sacrifices himself, thinking these other three shouldn't be, I'm the least useful, I would agree if you went that
Mhm.
way with that argument. But a lot of times his impulsivity, yes, it does look like it comes from a sort of a selfish place. But there are other times in his character development where it's more of that snap decision to do what's right.
Right.
And I feel sort of deontology, like he's kind of there, but I don't know. You might disagree.
Not in a real formal way, but yeah, and
Yeah.
just intuitively.
Yeah.
Well, Johnny will say, listen, this isn't right.
Mm.
Or Johnny is just as likely as anybody else to see someone about to cross a line and say, listen, you can't do that. We don't kill.
Mm.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
there's been I can remember a few times off the top of my head where he's in a situation where one of the other members goes nuts and is about to kill somebody. He says, "Hey, we don't do that.
Mm.
Not it's not a good idea. Not it'll end up backfiring in the long run. But just the Fantastic Four aren't killers. Period."
Wow.
Which could be deontological. It could be more of a virtue ethics. What's the moral character of the team? I would say, if I was going to say that Johnny has a utilitarian aspect to him, it's a very focused one. In
Mm.
other words, he wants to do the best for his more immediate circle. He's not like Reed, who's thinking about mankind
Mm.
or the earth or all the inhabitants of the galaxy or anything. He's thinking about his family, his friends, New York. He's more like Batman in that case, where Batman's focused on Gotham City,
Mm.
mainly because he doesn't have any superpowers other than incredible wealth. But the fact that just and, I talked about this, I think, when we talked about the Batman and Ethics book, is
Mm.
that it's actually very reasonable for him to limit his activities to Gotham City, given the limitations of what one man can do.
Mm.
I mean, just trying to eliminate crime in one large city is impossible enough. He doesn't have to try to eliminate crime in the entire world.
Mm.
And I think Johnny, who is a smart guy, as I try to emphasize in the book, he's not the dummy he paints himself to be and other people paint him to be,
Mm.
but he's not a genius like
Yeah.
Reed. And his power is not, he's not Superman. I mean,
Mm.
his power is very powerful and very potentially destructive,
Hmm.
but it's not like he could save the world on his own. So I think when he does go forward and act heroically, it's mainly to benefit and save the people in his immediate area, whether that's his friends and family or the people that he's rushing into the burning building to save. But he's not thinking of, again, compared to Reed, he's not thinking in utilitarianism as a maximization problem. What can I do to save the most people in the world?
Yeah.
That's definitely not the way Johnny thinks.
Hmm. And now that actually you were just mentioning Reed, in regards to him, do you see his story as a little bit of a cautionary tale of, the end justifies the means type
Oh, yeah.
thinking?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and that's why I said Sue really, serves as that moral guardrail for him to emphasize that, the ends, no matter how worthy and no matter how noble, do not justify necessarily any means you take to do them.
Mm.
And this comes out very, very, apparently during the Civil War, but a lot of things he does, and then he starts just hiding things from her and you think he rationalizes this to himself, says, "Oh, I want to save her the worry.
Mm.
I've got my own plan. I'm sure about it. I don't want her to worry." But I also think part of it was that, God, if I told her about this, she'd probably tell me no.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of that he already anticipates, even if he won't acknowledge it to himself.
Mm.
And there's sometimes in the more recent comics where he admires the fact that she thinks about people. When he thinks about people, they're numbers in some algorithm, but she thinks about people, as individuals. And he really appreciates that. There's one line in a recent comic where he says he makes a nice play on her main power of invisibility. And she says her best power is making people feel seen
Mm.
because the story she's going into the Baxter building, their headquarters, and there's a disaster and she has to save people. But when she's going into the Baxter building in the beginning of the story, she greets, one of the cleaning people and asks
Hmm.
how her son is doing. How did he do on his exam last week?
Mm.
And she meets a janitor and asks them, how his vacation was last month. And every person she meets that you might assume would just be nameless and faceless to her, she knows them, remembers them, asks specific things about their life, makes them feel seen,
Mm.
as Reed said. So Sue is very focused on humanity not as an abstract concept, but as a very meaningful, humanity is not an abstract mass. It is individuals, it is people. And she helps him remember that when he goes, like I said, goes off the rails and just wants to enact some plan that in theory will benefit people in the future,
Mm.
even though it may have a very, very disastrous impact on individuals right now by limiting their freedom or hampering their well-being in the present, which is something Tony Stark would do,
Mm.
except he doesn't have Sue in his life to
Mm.
be that guardrail. He has to wait till Captain America comes and beats him up, says no. And that's
Yeah.
definitely a less pleasant outcome than Reed gets with Sue, where he goes to bed with her every night and she can tell him, "Listen, that thing you were talking about today, I don't think it's such a great idea."
Mm.
I think
And
I think in the book
yeah.
at one point, don't I say that their interaction during Civil War is like if Captain America and Iron Man were married.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can't remember if I kept that in or not, but yeah, I mean it is not necessarily in their specific character interactions, of course, but in terms of their ideological, differences. She has they have just as many discussions as Cap and Iron Man do throughout the Civil War storyline, where she tells them, you can't do this. You're going too far. You're hurting people.
Mm.
Even if you think in the end, several steps down the line, it's going to benefit people, it's hurting people now, and you're not considering that. And during one of their huge fights, where he's been saying all along during Civil War, he's doing this for humanity, he's doing this to block disaster, and then she overhears him tell somebody that he's doing it to protect his family,
Mm.
which is also good, but it's not what he told her.
Mm-hmm.
So unbeknownst to him, she's been standing next to him invisible the whole time. So she makes herself visible. She says, "You liar," biggest jackass in the world, or whatever she said in that
Mm.
one in
Mm.
the quote. And then she says, "Do I look like I need protecting?" And she shoots one of her force fields up through the ceiling of the building and down to the sub basement
Mm.
of all the floors in the Baxter building, up and down. And she says, "Do I look like I need protection?"
Mm.
And when she storms off, says, "We're done. This is over. I can't look at you. You're not the man I loved." And she storms off, and he can't even bring himself to think about the deeper moral issues she brought up. He
Mm.
starts calculating the damage to the Baxter building and how much it'll cost to repair it.
Mm. Mhm.
Not because that's what's important, it's because that's what he's comfortable thinking about.
Wow.
And he's not comfortable thinking about all the relevant issues she brought up.
Wow.
But while he's thinking of the numbers, every once in a while he hits on a point she mentioned,
Mhm.
gets frustrated with it, goes back to the numbers. It was really, really well written issue written by J. Michael Straczynski, who wrote that great Captain America speech that I always quote from Amazing Spider-Man, from when Spider-Man is about to join his side in Civil War, and says, how do you keep up the resolve to do what's right in the face of everyone telling you you're wrong? And Captain America says the great speech, just when everyone's against you, when the mob's against you, when the press is against you, you plant your feet like the river of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And when they tell you to back off, you say no, you back off. And I love that. But he also wrote this. He at the time during the Civil War, when there was the main miniseries written by Mark Millar, and then everyone was writing tie-in issues in all the individual comics. He was writing both Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. So he got a lot of the added nuance to the story. Now, it's one of the great things about crossovers like this is you have the main action, the main beats in the main, like Civil War, comic, 7-issue comic story. But then there were over 100 tie-in issues where you can see, characters' reactions to the story that can't be represented in these 7 issues.
Hmm.
And so Straczynski could take the Fantastic Four, who were very tangential to the main story, and show how this affected the four,
Mm-hmm.
as well as dealing with Spider-Man and Captain America, who are obviously huge players in the main series as well.
Something I don't know what this is. I really badly want to get into this because we're sort of mentioning a bit it, but not really. So in regards to Reed Richards, right? What are some of the things, for example, that Sue kind of pulled him back from doing? Like let's say you mentioned taking away people's freedom. Could we talk about what do you mean by that? Because I know what you mean, but it is so interesting,
Oh,
actually.
and let's try to even contextualize this. Let's even put it into politics of the past 5 years. Like, what would that have looked like as an example?
Hmm.
Yep.
I don't know about that, but definitely, yeah.
Well, there are a lot. I mean, the Civil War storyline and the current storyline in the comics, which I could only touch on because it was just starting when the book had to be finished, and the Captain America storyline I wrote about so much in the second edition of my Captain America book, obviously touching on aspects of fascistic behavior
Hmm.
among superheroes and supervillains, paralleling possible developments like that in the government. Are you talking about the negative zone prison?
There was this one point, if I'm not mistaken, where he actually considered enslaving humanity for their own good. Like, I forget what it was, but there was something where he was talking with Doctor Doom, and Doom was like, "No, even this is something you shouldn't do." Like he was almost talking Richards out of it. Um,
Well, there was, during Civil War when I'm not sure, during Civil War, Reed did a number of things that were questionable, and the one was just supporting registration at all was
of
questionable.
course, yeah.
He did develop the clone of Thor that ended up killing Bill Foster, the one of the giant men.
Hmm.
And but yeah, I think the most resonant one, especially these days, is that he built a prison in the antimatter negative zone to hold heroes that refuse to register as a detainment facility without being arraigned, without any due process, basically.
Right.
So they were just sent there out of the dimension, and it was just trust us, they'll be fine.
Mm.
And so a lot of this was brought up. I mean, obviously, it has direct parallels today. At the time, it was meant to be an analog to Guantanamo Bay,
Right.
where a
Mm.
lot of terror suspects were sent at the time, again, without necessarily receiving due process. Uh, and Reed thought this is great. This keeps them isolated from the population and keeps everyone out of danger. But Sue would say, listen, these, not only are these people that haven't been convicted of a crime that you're sending literally to a different dimension, a
Right.
Mhm.
dangerous dimension that we keep sealed off with a big vault because we're afraid of it. And you don't want to go there, but you're sending all these people there, not to mention there are friends, which is the
Mm.
personal aspect she brings into it. He does a lot of things like this, and he's got plans for even more that he never tells her about. He's got this room in the Baxter building that's just white walls and just have equations and scribblings all over them. And it's just all math. And he talks about how much he admires Isaac Asimov's psychohistory from the Foundation novels, and that you can predict the future of humanity as a whole, not as individuals, which again goes back to how he thinks of humanity as an abstract,
Mm.
and just all these further plans he had. And after the registration side wins the Civil War, he thinks he's going to be able to enact all these plans. And they don't go into detail what they are, but soon after the Civil War ends, a version of Doctor Doom from the future comes back, and he comes back to stop Reed because he says, "You guys don't know what this guy's thinking about. If he does this, he's going to destroy the world."
Wow.
Wow.
And he says, "Sue, you know him. How can you continue supporting him?" And she says, "Well, we talked. He's going to be better. He's going to think about things." And
Mm.
Reed's like, "No," or Doom
Yeah.
is, "No, he's not.
Mhm.
No, he's not." And so after Civil War, he can, in all his grand statements about this accursed Richards, he often brings up these things that he doesn't care about right or wrong. He just does what he thinks is good, his supreme arrogance, which is projection. And, he just always thinks he knows what's right.
Mm.
Now, the ironic thing is, in this, I mean, that point still stands, but in this particular story, they find out what future this future doom came from.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's a paradise.
Mm.
It's a paradise created by Reed Richards' actions.
Wait, so what?
So he came back to prevent Reed from
Yeah.
succeeding, because if anyone's going to save the world, it's going to be Doom, not Reed Richards.
Wow, what a turn.
Yeah.
Wait, so okay, now this is what I felt like I was building up to, at least for me personally. I don't know about, our audience. But for me personally, I feel like the most interesting one with the sort of the moral dimension here is Doctor Doom. And so
Oh yeah.
often, yeah, yeah, yeah. So
I
often
I,
when,
well, I could have written a book about him. I mean, that was the
yeah,
longest chapter, and I really had to kind of hold myself back. I have a whole list of other things I could have written about him.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and when you think about like villains, even though it's sort of become more popular to have some sort of like arc for the villain, like with Joker or whatnot, I mean, for the most part, like you don't really have villains who are preoccupied with morality. It's more like their version of morality is more like, hey, I'm retaliating, right? So it's like the world has done wrong to me, so now I don't give a
Mm.
shit about it, and it's ultimately like destruction is ethical because of, let's say, my trauma, right? For lack of a better term here. And so, but with Doctor Doom, it's different, I think, and I'm sure maybe some villain somewhere else kind of has the same perspective, right? But the point is to say, from my reading of it, Doctor Doom seems different because he has a version of morality for the world. It's not just, oh, hey, this was done to me, and now ethically speaking, I'm allowed to do what I want, where it's more of an anarchy. Like that's what you kind of get with the Joker character, at least in my. I'm not like a huge fan, so don't quote me on this. But with Doctor Doom, there's a sense of I have this version of morality that's right for the world, even though it's twisted. It's at the very least there's some sort of coherence to it. So can you talk about that? So how did Doctor Doom? How did Doctor Doom? First of all, let's say get into the origin story of Doctor Doom because that's super interesting, but then also how Doctor Doom came to his version of morality as well. And what is it?
Well, Doctor Doom does resent the world, and
Hmm.
that's where his more evil actions come from. He thinks the world has done him wrong, and especially Reed Richards.
Hmm.
So this starts out. He was raised in a Romani tribe in the fictional Eastern European nation of Latveria,
Right.
where his tribe was oppressed by the local monarchy. His father was a healer, and his mother was a witch. So the local monarchy had his mother killed because, well, she made a deal with the devil to get power, and when she started using the power, they killed her.
Hmm.
And then that sets up the whole thing where one of Doctor Doom's main motivations in his life is to rescue his mother's soul from hell because she made this deal with the devil to get this power.
Hmm.
That's a whole other thing. Um, but he keeps on, he grows up with his father, who is eventually brought in by the king to heal his daughter, and he can't.
Hmm.
So they drive the father and young Victor away. They run into the mountains where they freeze. The father dies. Victor's an orphan. Obviously hates the Latvian monarchy, hates the world, hates humanity that has oppressed the Romani people, and he finds his mother's magical artifacts,
Hmm.
which she wanted hidden from him. She didn't want him to take up magic. So he's already a genius. He's already picking up science. Now he's learning magic. He earns a scholarship to come study in America, where he ends up in college with Reed Richards and Ben Grimm. Reed Richards is, hello, fellow, well met. And Doom is like, you're just jealous of me, whoever you are. I'm not here to make friends.
Hmm.
And then the fateful day, his accident versus the Fantastic Four's accident. Victor is building machine to try to access the afterlife to talk to his mother in hell, but he makes a mistake, and Reed finds the mistake, tries to tell Victor about it. Victor's too proud to admit
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So he says, you're just jealous of me. Get out of here. He activates the machine. It blows up. He gets kicked out of school. His face is damaged, though there's
Right.
controversy about how much his face was actually damaged. He roams the world in disgrace, ends up in this monastery in the mountains of Tibet, where they train him further in the mystical arts, and they make his armor, including his mask.
Hmm.
Now they're forging the mask out of hot metal. They say you have to wait till it cools to put it on. Doom says, I cannot wait. He just puts the mask on. Sizzle, sizzle, his face is burnt. So now, whenever he takes the mask off, rarely his face is all burnt, but it also covers up exactly how much his face was or wasn't scarred by the accident in college.
Hmm.
Mm.
And we presume that, I mean, based on sketches that they found, his creator, his artistic creator, Jack Kirby, with Stan Lee, intended for his scar to be extremely tiny, but him being so vain, he didn't like
Hmm.
any flaw in his face. So he says, "Oh my gosh, I'm
Hmm.
ugly,"
Right.
Hmm.
and then he intentionally burned his face
Wow.
so no one could question that.
Hmm.
And other people have said it was more scarred. It's one of these fascinating unsolved mysteries in comics. So, like I said, most of Doctor Doom's early, more cartoonish evil schemes were to get back at humanity and to get back at Reed Richards, without whom none of this would have happened because he was jealous of me and he caused the accident and he got me kicked out of school and everything. But then later on, you get Doom characterized more as the hero of his own story, where he actually believes that he can benefit mankind by ruling it. And in his own version of utilitarianism, this is the best solution. And what's interesting is that Reed comes to a very similar conclusion after the Civil War, after all these follow-up calamities that happen. He develops this portal that allows him to see into all these other dimensions in the multiverse.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So he goes through countless. It's kind of like Doctor Strange going through his 12 million possibilities in the Avengers movie.
Right.
Hmm.
And he goes through all these possibilities, all these dimensions where things went wrong, just as bad, worse, terrible, and it only finds a couple where everything worked out. And he says, what's the common element in these couple where everything worked out? Reed Richards acted decisively and alone.
Wow.
So he sits back and he says, have I just been afraid to acknowledge this because I don't want to seem arrogant? I mean, this is arrogant to think that I'm mankind's savior.
Mm-hmm.
But am I avoiding my responsibility by denying this fact out of some claim to humility?
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
of course, Dr. Doom would never do this. Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Doom is sure he's the one to save the world.
Mm-hmm.
He has no doubt.
Yep.
And so, they're during a period when most of the Fantastic Four were gone, and Dr. Doom sincerely tries to be a hero and takes up the mantle of Iron Man while Tony Stark is temporarily dead. And then by the time the Fantastic Four come back, he's become Dr. Doom again, and Reed Richards hears about all these things that have happened, and he says, "Wait a minute, Dr. Doom tried to be a hero," and Doom just says something like, "That shows the narrowness of your perspective. I've always been the hero." And my favorite example of this is during a storyline called Doom War, which really came out of the Black Panther comics, where Doom wants to get his hands on the vibranium stores underneath Wakanda,
Mm-hmm.
an incredibly valuable, powerful metal. He wants to get access to it, and of course they won't sell it to him. So he wants to break into the vault where they keep it. But the vault has, of course, all these technologically advanced and magic locks because Wakanda is also a country that works in technology as science as well as magic. But Doom is very expert in these things, so he gets through all the locks, gets through all security mechanisms, defeats all the guards. But the final lock, you actually have to pass through the Panther God,
Mm.
the god of Wakanda, and you have to prove that you're pure of heart. And so when all the heroes hear this, they're like, okay, he's done. There's no
Yeah.
way he's getting in now.
Right.
Mm.
So you see Doom, and the Panther God is this ethereal, glowing panther.
Mm.
He says, "Who dares claim the stores of vibranium?" And he says, "I, Doom, I claim them." And he says, "How, I know you. You're a horrible villain that's killed
Mm.
millions of people and tried to conquer the world. How can you claim to want this?" And Doom says, "I am pure of heart." And he strips down all his armor, takes the mask off, stands in front of the Panther God with his arms spread, says, "Judge me."
Mm.
And the Panther God, kind of sneaks all around him and sniffs at him and reads his mind. And Doom explains that, humanity is I don't want to say doomed, but humanity is doomed, and they're just going to look at what people do of their own volition. Countries fight over religion and wealth and preconceptions and superstitions, and humanity is just, it has to be saved, and I'm the only one that can save it.
Mm.
And even though, yes, people will die, and yes, I have to take some extreme ends, and yes, the ends do justify the means, this end is important enough. And the Panther God, when it's done, has to say, you're a horrible human being. You're incredibly arrogant and vain, but you sincerely believe with all of your heart that you are mankind's salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And by my standard, you're pure of heart.
Yeah.
Now,
So the vault
this is
the
where
vault
Jordan
opens and he
Peterson
gets
would
the
come in.
vibranium.
This is where Jordan Peterson would come in and he would say, define pure.
Sure.
But I just love the scene where Dr. Doom basically just exposes himself and says, "Judge me. Do
Mm.
your worst."
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Dr. Doom is such an interesting character because he
Yeah.
does have this aspect of him where he sincerely does want to save the world,
Yeah.
but he also wants to get credit for it. He
Mm-hmm.
wants to be known as the one who saved the world. He doesn't, Reed would be fine if the world were saved and no one knew he did it.
Mm.
He'd be on to the next problem anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But Doom wants to be the one who saved the world. And so he's got this, of course, incredible intelligence and skill and knowledge and everything, and ambition, which could be used for good. And it's not like the Spider-Man panel where there's the scientist who's turning people into dinosaurs. And Spider-Man asks, you could be curing cancer. Why are you turning people into dinosaurs?
Mm-hmm.
And the guy says, I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Doom does want to save the world. But even more important, he wants to be the one who saves the world. So everyone worships Doom.
Wow.
And he thinks, and another aspect of him is he thinks he's a man of honor, but he betrays that at every turn whenever there's any advantage to breaking a promise or breaking his word or breaking a deal,
Mm.
which is the opposite of honor. Honor
Mm-hmm.
means you do the right thing even if it's not to your advantage. He does it whenever it's to his advantage,
Wow.
but he just wants to think of himself as an honorable person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this frustrates Reed because Reed will always be sympathetic towards Doom because he sees the person Doom could be.
Mm-hmm.
He sees the potential within him. And so he's always giving Doom the benefit of the doubt. Even when he knows that Doom is going to betray this, he can't help but give him the benefit of the doubt.
Mm. Why is that important to him, though, to do so?
Because, well, part of it I think is because he does feel a little bit of guilt
Mm.
over the accident in college, and he argues with Sue about this in one story where Sue says, what are you kidding? You tried to tell him, you told
Mm-hmm.
him there's a mistake and he didn't listen to you. He
Yep.
says, yeah, but maybe I was too haughty about it, maybe I was too full of myself about it, maybe
Sure.
I could have told him differently. I
Mm.
mean, the theme of my Reed chapter in the book is he takes on so much responsibility even for things that he can't, there's no way he could be considered responsible for.
Wow.
Just because he realizes that all his gifts and all his intellect and all his powers and all the opportunities that he's got, he feels that they invest him with a responsibility, not just to use them,
Mm.
which is fair, but to actually make sure that the best things happen, even if he doesn't have any role to play in them.
Mm.
So he takes on too much responsibility for the world.
Wow.
Uh, Something I wanted to bring up. So this happened during there's something called Secret Wars. So basically, there was this one point where Reed, Iron Man, other heroes, they had to like stop incursions from occurring, like from basically from their universe
Mm-hmm.
from being completely destroyed. All these different universes are like dying in the multiverse
Mm.
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And basically their way to avoid theirs from going, from uh, being essentially deleted or erased
Mm-hmm.
is they have to basically destroy another one in order to sort of stall for time and stop this entire, thing from collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so basically, we see this trolley problem in Secret Wars, right? And uh, how do you think um, those kinds of stories help us deal with morally impossible choices, like in terms of how to act? Because on one level, yes, self-preservation, right? I want to save all of my people.
Mm.
I want to save my family. I want to save my world. And so, of course, unfortunately, we will have to sacrifice this other world in order to do that. But then on the other hand, you're literally killing an entire universe who have the same exact thought of as you, feel the same exact things as you, and also want to save themselves as much as you. And this is a huge dilemma. So yeah, I guess I would ask, how do you think like these kinds of stories help us, I guess, wrestle with morally impossible choices? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head calling it a trolley problem, though it's a one big ass trolley.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
that even the basic trolley problem of, in case people aren't familiar, it deals with a runaway trolley with five passengers on it. It's rushing towards a broken piece of track where if it hits it, the trolley will crash and everyone will die. But you or whoever is operating in the story is standing next to a switch. If you pull the switch, you can divert the trolley to another track,
Mm.
and it won't hit the broken track, but it will kill one person standing on the other track who won't see the trolley coming in time.
Mm.
Mhm.
So basically, you've got five people that are going to die if you don't do anything, you can save those 5 people by doing something, but that thing you do will kill one other person.
Hmm.
Okay, so there's that trade-off. And this trolley problem is used as a thought experiment to draw out intuitions about different moral factors. Is the most important thing saving the most lives? Is the most important thing not acting to kill? There's different variants of the problem that draw out different intuitions. It's an amazingly rich
Yeah.
uh, example
And
that
there are also
unfortunately
religious
I think
versions.
it's been beat into the ground a little bit, and people have started to minimize its value. But I still think it has tremendous value
Yeah.
because you can't find a right answer. There's no right thing to do.
Mm.
And in terms of you've got a very stark contrast between the utilitarian right thing to do and the deontological right thing to do, and you're going to violate one of them. Now, obviously, if you side with one of them or the other, the choice is easy. But I think for most people that see the basic point of both systems, that's just the conflict that you find very hard to reconcile. And this just magnifies it incredibly in dealing with entire you know universes, but even just the two earths that are going to collide. And Alan hit on a great point, is not only are you deciding, do I destroy this other earth to save mine, but there's also people on this other earth saying the exact same thing. So
Yeah.
it's you think of it in terms of, do I act offensively to destroy this other earth first, but that also may be a defensive move, because what if they're doing the exact same thing and you have to beat them to it?
Hmm.
But the great thing about that storyline is the first time they do it. And Captain America, of course, has this huge discussion with them where you can't do this. There has to be a way. You can't just jump to the fastest answer. And all the other heroes like Iron Man and Mr. Fantastic are saying, we're not jumping to anything. We thought through everything. Don't insult us like this. And Captain America says, no, I know how this is going to go. You're going to do it. You're going to rationalize doing it again, and it's going to get easier each time.
Hmm.
And he looks to Reed and says, Reed, how can you even consider this? And Reed says, why are you surprised I would do anything I could to save my family?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which shows that, kind of like Johnny, he's not just focused on humanity as an abstract. And when it
Hmm.
comes down to it, he's focused on his family,
Hmm.
which again is the reason you can't really pigeonhole them very in the simple categories. But after they dismiss Captain America and mind wipe him, which comes back to hurt him, but they finally get to the point where they try all these different ways to maybe shift the earth into a different dimension, or maybe make them pass each other. All these ways, some of them work, some of them don't. Finally, they end up just having to pull the trigger once and destroy the other earth.
Hmm.
And Namor does it. Namor the Submariner, because he says, you guys are putting all your personal moralities and virtue ahead of the fact that it's either us or them, and I choose us.
Hmm.
So he presses the button, the other earth explodes. The whole next issue deals with them coming to terms with this. And Namor says, you guys are idiots. I'm going. You're on your own. I'm going to save myself. And Reed and I can't remember. No, Reed and Black Panther, T'Challa, look at each other. And of course, they're some of the oldest friends there, and they say, I can't do this again.
Hmm.
I just have to go tell my family it's over.
Hmm.
I can't do this again. So now he's not going to do everything he can to save his family, because he realizes even that doesn't justify in his mind.
Mm.
And the amazing thing is, Sue knew nothing about this. He
Hmm.
kept this secret from Sue, this whole incursions, Illuminati thing. Sue didn't know anything about it yet. But he came to this realization once they actually acted, once they pulled the switch, diverted the trolley, killed the person. Once they finally did that, it hit him what they did, because it was just hypothetical, it was theoretical. Now he says, wow, we actually did this, and I cannot do it again.
Yeah.
Now, the hitch in that, I mean, it's great as far as that's concerned. It's kind of
Mm.
like that story with the future doom. If we stop there, it's a great story and morality tale and everything. But the hitch is the way they set up the problem. It's not us or them, it's them or all of us.
Hmm.
Because if the Earths do collide, both Earths, both universes are destroyed.
Yeah.
So the other Earth, the other universe is going to be destroyed either way, unless you can save them both, which I mean,
Right.
they try to do. But when it comes down to it, it's not us or them. It's either we destroy this earth or this earth hits us and we all die.
Hmm.
So in a sense, the other earth is gone anyway. It's just, do we eliminate it first before it hits us?
Right.
So again, in utilitarian terms, it's exactly, I mean, I mean, not, it's exactly the same output for the other earth, but it clearly saves yours. But in deontological terms, you got to wonder, is there a difference?
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
definitely an imperative to save your own earth. Is killing is destroying the other earth forbidden if it's already going to die anyway?
Yeah.
You wouldn't think
Yeah.
so, but that's a whole other question the story brings up.
Yeah, well, then there's also the question of knowledge, right? Like, do we know for sure that that's what's going to happen? I mean, even though, right, even though maybe there's like a 99% certainty or whatever, there could be the case of, well, human knowledge is fallible, and like, how do you know for sure that if you don't do this thing, that outcome is going to happen? So,
That's true.
Well, that's a great point you bring up, because in one of the early incursions, they don't find a way to solve it.
mm,
They decide they're not going to blow up the earth. They just
mm,
kind of, wait
hmm,
for it to happen, and then it doesn't happen. And they're
wow.
like,
Hmm.
is it over? I mean, is
Are we
the
dead?
threat past? But then
Mm,
they figure out why it didn't happen and why the next one will.
mm,
But for that period of time, they have to wonder, did we almost just destroy a world that was no threat because
wow.
of that information? Because exactly because of the information problem you bring up, did we have the right information?
Hmm.
That is scary. Yeah. Yeah.
WMDs in Iraq, man. Literally.
Yeah. But you know what's interesting? This all perfectly sets up, we of course have the Fantastic Four movie coming out, then Doomsday next year, and then
Mhm.
Secret Wars. I have to ask you, are you excited for the Fantastic Four movie?
I am, because everything I've seen from it, it's not just a distinctive tone from the rest of the movies,
Hmm.
but it seemed that one of the things I've always loved about the Fantastic Four since I started really reading them about a dozen years ago was, it was, even though bad things happen, it's an inherently optimistic series.
Hmm.
It's they're going forward. Each of them has died multiple times, throughout the history, and they've endured tragedies, and Ben's life itself is a tragedy. But they're always going further, and they're always keeping their heads up, and not just out of duty like Batman. Oh, I've got to go fight crime again tonight.
Hmm. Hmm.
But saying, oh, let's go discover a new world. Let's go discover a new technology. Let's go save somebody. I mean, they take, I mean, not necessarily the same sense of joy that Johnny gets in it, just being, the superhero celebrity, but they take an we can make tomorrow better.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And Reed embodies this more than anybody else, I think, in comics does. And he's like, yeah, I wanted to write about this more in the book, but I didn't have a place to put it. But his optimism is almost anti-scientific,
Hmm.
in that it doesn't depend on any successes or failures or anything in his lab. It
Mm.
doesn't depend on how bad things have gotten.
Hmm.
We're going to figure it out tomorrow.
Hmm.
There's always an answer. That's one of his. I mean, it's not a famous catchphrase, but he's constantly saying this. There's always an answer. We
Mm.
can find a way.
Yeah.
Now, no, obviously with the incursions and stuff, that's this messed with it because they ran out of ways.
Of
But
course.
not saying it's a metaphysical truth that there is always an answer, but he believes this, not because he has to, I think because he sincerely does, because he just has optimism based on his intellect and the opportunities and what he can do and what his team can do and his family. He just has this cheery outlook.
Wow.
And when to go back to that passage you read at the beginning, Leon, about what the purpose of the team is, and a lot of people go back and forth. They're not a superhero team. They're adventurers. They're explorers. They're imaginauts, to use Mark Wade's term. But there's one part where Ben is talking about the team, and he says, Reed comes up with these crazy ideas, and we all go with him to keep him safe. So Reed has this
Yeah.
way to make the world better or save the world, and we're going to go there to make sure he can do it.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a one storyline where the team hires a PR firm to help them look better, and the young intern actually staying, spending time with the family and asking them about themselves and stuff. He realizes that that's what they really are. Reed is this scientific exploratory genius, and they all support him, but they're all integral part of that. He couldn't do it by himself. I mean, he does the brainy stuff by himself, but as far as having a support team to keep him safe and to keep him morally on track, like Sue
Mm-hmm.
does,
Mm-hmm.
and the PR kid says, do they realize how valuable they all are to this enterprise?
Mm.
Mm.
I love that. And I think that I mean, for me at least, what makes them superheroes is the fact that they're able to carry around responsibility, or a degree of responsibility, a degree of shame, regret, guilt, whatever, right? That I think for the most part, that most people just can't do. And if fundamentally, I mean, like these ultimate moral decisions, and this is why for me, I love this sort of the book, the concept, I love these things kind of so much, is because it sort of gives us a sense of what it would look like to actually kind of carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. And it also kind of gives us the sense that, we're not as responsible as these people, right? And we never will be. So maybe if they can solve their moral problems and, the problems of the world, right? Maybe then we could start to actually think about this with a lesser degree of anxiety than we may have been before. So, all right, Alan, final questions for Mark before we wrap up.
Oh, yes. Of course, as always, if we wanted to follow you, follow your work, and of course, buy the book, where can we do that?
Well, my main website is at profmdwhite.com. Prof. MD White is also my Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky handles. And there's details on how to find my books and my various blogs at that website. So again, profmdwhite.com.
I love it, Mark. Thank you again, man. Six-time guest.
Thank
Yeah,
So
you.
this is
happy.
awesome, as
Yeah,
always. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again, guys.
absolutely,
So,
man. We'll talk to you soon.
take care.
All right. Take care.
All right, great. So, everyone, as you know, if you like the show, you can give us a follow at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. On X, we're at Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe, hit the bell on YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.